All right, so now we're going to the section on the township on pages 56 to 65 in my translation. So he talks about the sovereignty of the people. Under democracy, there are the people are the sovereign power. And this can be shown in two ways, formally and informally. Formally, when the people have definite established institutions in which to govern themselves, and informally by the way in which they behave and speak. So forms are formal, they're official, they're public, and they're vested with authority. And they have formalities, for example, voting. You have to register to vote, and you have to do it at a certain time, and have the qualifications for it. Courts have formalities, even rituals. Formalities let you know that you are dealing with a form. It's government in broad daylight. The formal part of government is what is visible and open and public. But the sovereignty of the people is also shown informally. And that's in the second part of the first volume, which I'll come to briefly, shortly. So this is the difference between formal and informal that's very important to Tocqueville. And a township is a kind of government which arises almost informally, spontaneously, but it's a formal kind. And so this is his famous description and praise of the New England township. This form of government, which is just a small town, and all the members or the citizens of the town come together, and they vote, and they elect their governors. They call them select men. That phrase is still used in Massachusetts today. Select men, they've been selected. And so they come together and they choose these select men, and the select men then have a certain power to do things. So say you have a house and there's no road to your house. So you need a road. You can't build the road by yourself. You need the help of other people. So to do this, you need to associate. And the association requires certain formalities. How are you going to decide where to build the road and who should pay for it? So you have to have a formal way of making that decision. And that is the power of the township. So he said it was, in America, the township was spontaneous in that it just sort of seemed to form by itself. Nobody had to found it. There was no George Washington to do this. But once it was formed, then it became formal. So American self-government as a whole has a kind of structure and a kind of hierarchy to it. And it's at the bottom level is this township, which is spontaneous. And here you obey the government because it does things for you which you can see with your eyes are useful, and which also you can see you couldn't do by yourself. And it's also, you do it with people whom you know. So this is the most natural, the most easy, the most familiar form of government, and yet it also has this formal structure. So when you're in a town, the being in a town teaches you how to associate with other human beings equally. Okay? You're doing this freely because you see it helps, and you're doing it equally because everybody gets a vote. But with that equality, you also make officers. Like you have your own volunteer fire department or police department. You elect somebody who's the chief. And so then you've created inequality out of equality. but it's a democratic inequality. So this is how Tocqueville shows you, see, that the universal ideal of equality is not enough by itself. Because by itself it has no way to govern. There's no way to govern itself. And each of us is his own. We're all each equal, but we can't. We're also equally weak. Equality is no good if it leaves you weak. You have to make equality into strength. And you can only do this through association. So there's this great emphasis in Tocqueville on the association and how that is necessary to the success of a democracy. And this is one of the great things that a European can learn by looking at the practice of America. So you begin from the sovereignty of the people. And what does that mean? It means that each individual is assumed to be as educated, as virtuous, and as powerful as any other individual, despite the fact that that's not really the case. Still, that's what it means. Yeah? So why would you obey? Answer, because it's useful. Not because I'm inferior to you, or you're a better person than I am, but because if we get together, we can do more than if we're by ourselves. So it's very different from Plato's Republic. So the rulers are better than the people whom they rule. They're wiser. They're philosophers. Therefore, they deserve to be kings. The individual is still the best and the only judge of his own interest. So you make it clear to everybody that something easy and obvious like building a road is good for you. And then Tocqueville brings people out of themselves, out of their own individuality, which is weak, into becoming free. Equality leads to freedom when you can accomplish something together. And how do you accomplish it? Through the use of these forms. So forms allow Americans to be both free and orderly. In Europe, Tocqueville says, the people who like freedom are opposed to the people who like order. Because the people who like order say that democracy is disorderly. And Tocqueville's trying to show that in America, democracy is democratic, but still orderly. Of course, though, the township isn't enough, because you belong to a large country. You belong to a state in America, and then the states are together in a union. So there's a very different hierarchy of government. It starts from this spontaneous township, which is very close to the people, and ends with the federal government, which is a long way away, and which is very artificial, and which has this very elaborate construction, and which was made by George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and by great founders. And that did take a lot of intelligence, and it did take knowledge of all the previous history of republics to show why they had gone wrong and what they needed to turn right, to go right. So it isn't that the township is everything, or that the principle of the township is everything, but it's what connects the idea of government to the people, to self-government. And you only elect the officers in the federal government. And the federal government is divided to these three branches, and also the whole government in America is divided into states and to the federal government. It's a kind of federation in which the states are much more powerful, I think, than the provinces in China. So all this is elaborate and has to be thought out and thought up. But it starts with this basic township. Yes?
What's the size at that time of the town?
Pardon?
Size of the town at that
Size of the town? Very small, I don't know. Maybe 100, that one, or 200. in those days. Cambridge was fairly large, and Boston was a city. I think Boston did not have this kind of town government, even from the beginning. But town, yes, I see, town is smaller than a city. And the French word he uses, commune, is also a very small unit in France. So you would know everybody in your town, or village, maybe. You would know everybody. It's even smaller than a polis in Greece.
Is the township and the spontaneity uniquely American?
The answer is I don't know, but but I don't know of any place where this has been made a point of as a feature of democracy. I know there were self-governing villages in Russia, in old Russia, the Mir, and the same may be true in China. But I mean, as a part of, but see, those would be ruled by the elders, or the most important families. So you could find this in a sort of aristocracy, but it wouldn't have this voluntary aspect of everybody seeing something and coming together. In America, it has the idea of newness. That a town is something new. You're in a new country, and you're starting government from the first. So these would be Puritans who came over from England, and Tocqueville talks about them in the second chapter as the point of departure of American democracy. And it may be because in religion they believe that each individual had his own way of approaching God, or his own private approach to God. But they were all together in thinking this. So that was a kind of religious basis maybe for the practice of this town government. But he doesn't bring in religion here to describe it that way. Yes?
Do you think that the fact that people can privately own a gun is a contribution to the township?
I'm sorry, that...
I mean, the possession of a gun or possession of a weapon.
Oh, weapons, I see.
Yeah, do you think that maybe that fact could be a contribution to the township?
Yeah, Tocqueville doesn't mention that. Yeah, right.
What do you think?
What do I think? What? Whether this was a contribution to American democracy?
Yes.
Yes. I mean, guns are a contribution to democracy, period. Because you don't have to be as accomplished with a sword. Anybody can shoot a gun, or almost anybody. So that's one thing. And another, yes, you're thinking of the Second Amendment into the U.S. Constitution, and which is very popular sort of among right-wing groups in America as a basis for American liberty. Yes, that say that each person had his own gun because everybody was a hunter. You know, that certainly gave. I mean, yeah, you weren't a totally weak individual if you had a gun. You could defend yourself, or you could get your own game, your own food.
I have a question about election and selection.
Elections?
Yeah, elections or selections. Are they the presidents are selected or elected? Or another question is, only as far as I know, like in the States, the presidents are elected, but not any other kind of institutions or universities. they're not elected, right? But they're selected. Do you think is that in this kind of practice is still like democratic?
Yeah, right. So I'm skipping over this part in Tocqueville's discussion of presidential elections, but and he speaks of a presidential election in America as something like a storm that comes and gets everybody excited. Everybody's talking about it, and then it passes over, and nobody talks about it anymore until another storm comes along. So, in other words, kind of different from this idea of choice, that everybody's thinking, and you know, which party should I vote for, which man should I vote for, and so on. Yeah. One of the great differences between the American Republic and all previous republics is that the American was the first one to have a strong executive power in one person, or one man. So before, the executive power had always been in a committee, and it was usually subordinate to the legislature. And this was a great cause of weakness in republics, in the history of republics, especially modern republics. So that was an innovation to have in a Republican country. It's either Republican principle is that power is safest when you put it in the hands of many people, not just one pair of hands, but many hands. In the Federalist, you can find the argument that it's safer to put it in one pair of hands than in many hands, because when it's one pair, then you know who's responsible. And if it's many, then they each point at the other and say, oh, he did it, not me. So you don't know whom to blame. And you see that although America is a democratic country in its beliefs, it is, as you say, surprisingly undemocratic in many of its practices and the extent of one-man rule. So, as you say, even a university, well, now we have a one-woman rule at Harvard, but that's not elected. That's selected by the board, and the same in business corporations and so on. So sometimes, say, I'm a political scientist, I belong to the American Political Science Association. So they have an election of the president. But it's a put-up job because there's only one person, there's an official candidate. You know about that kind of election. You're right. But I think what the American presidency in the Constitution, one thing it did for America was to make the idea of one-man rule much more acceptable than otherwise it would have been, or had been before.
Actually, I have a question that is, in the formality of the township, it is direct election, directly elected.
Direct election.
Yeah, but now it's indirect election with a lot of other procedures and technologies in the election. So my question is, do you think it's still a democracy today, or is a republic?
Yeah. Modern democracy seems to be a republic, and there isn't very much direct democracy. And this township is really just perhaps the only example you could give. Otherwise, we do have these offices and indirect elections and parties. And you have a lot of ignorance. People don't know whom they're voting for because it's not somebody from your village. How could you know? And so you only learn about certain people. You don't learn about everybody. There might be somebody that who would be a very good president that nobody knows somewhere, in some obscure place.
So when Tocqueville is praising about America's democracy, do do you think he's talking about the township democracy or the larger democracy?
You mean, does it still apply today?
I mean, he thinks that America is having an advanced democracy and an advanced way of having a government. But is he really praising that democracy that we are having today?
I mean, he was praising. I didn't quite get the end of your question. He was praising.
Sorry. I mean, is it the democracy he's praising?
Yeah.
Is it the township democracy?
Was it a conscious democracy?
Township.
Township democracy, yes. But yeah, he said that it's only in New England that you find that kind of township. So, so it's not universal. But I think he wants to show the idea of it. The idea of it is also to be found in these associations, which maybe I'll skip over because we're halfway through our time. Yeah, but that there is a kind of problem in freedom caused by the distance between government and the individual citizen. And so if you can show that there is some basis for an individual citizen to see that government works in a township, or in a situation close to that, then it's much more convincing, or it gives you an idea of what self-government should be, than just to see an army in a parade. So there's informal power as well as formal power, and I'll go through this a little more quickly. This is in the second part to the first volume, and he says that in America the people are sovereign, and this goes beyond forms. The first part was on forms, like the township, the Constitution, the courts, and things like that. But he says, despite these forms which are designed to moderate and qualify popular sovereignty, in the end, in America, the people get what they want. So, and if they want something, they will crash through the form, which is delaying or preventing them. There are no lasting obstacles to the opinions and the prejudices, the interests and the passions of the people. So the people will really get what they want. And so then he goes on to talk about informal ways of exercising power in America. And one is, first is parties. And then the second is freedom of the press and political associations. The parties, he makes a distinction between small parties and great parties. Great parties arise over some principle. And an example of that in America is the Federalist. They were a kind of aristocratic party that wanted to check the power of the people. And they were a great party because they raised this great question, whether the power of the people should be checked or should be extended. As in Tocqueville says, those two opinions can be found, sort of liberals and conservatives, or right and left, in all free countries. But now there are no great parties, he said. He meant in the 1830s, he was traveling under the presidency of Andrew Jackson, who was not a great man according to Tocqueville. And there were small parties whose ambitious people whose skill consists in forming powers or securing their own interests. First they secure their own interest, and then they look for a principle to justify it. But he also says there are interesting remains of aristocratic power in American democracy, and he speaks of the rich. He says the rich are a secret aristocracy in America. They know they're unequal, but they have to behave as if they're equal. So, and this is part of what Tocqueville means by equality of conditions. That doesn't mean that everybody has the same amount of money, or that there is no difference between the rich and the poor. But the rich have to defer to everyone else. If you meet a rich person in the street and you say hello, he has to say hello back. He can't give you the high hat, as we say. So, or somebody like very rich like Bill Gates. So who went to Harvard for a year, and then he left in order to become rich. And so he has all this money, but he has no public power just because he has money. In fact, the government even brought an antitrust suit against him, which they later dropped, but still he couldn't stop. He could build a house that cost $42 million. That's a nice house. But you begin to see, in this chapter, he's referring to aristocratic remains, certain anti-democratic or aristocratic elements in American democracy. So maybe that it isn't as democratic as it first appears and seems to be. The Federalist Party that made the Constitution was an aristocratic party of these great minds, really, of Madison and Hamilton, Benjamin Franklin. That was quite a gathering of great minds and great people in the federal Constitution. So then he talks about weapons of parties, which are the press and political associations. The associations are, he talks about civil associations in Volume 2, but here political associations, that's a kind of extension of the argument about township. So it's true that we don't have towns any longer in America that still have the same powers. They're all too big, and they're all representative. It's not direct democracy anymore. Only in a few places, in New Hampshire or something, as I happen to know. But there are associations which you can form face to face with other people, either formal or informal. And those are the way or the art of making associations seems to be almost second nature in America. I see that at Harvard, where there are very many, there's about 250 different student associations, which are, each of them is formed by students, and they often last only for 4 years, because the person who forms it graduates, and so somebody else comes along and he wants the honor of founding his own association. So the other ones aren't good enough, and we need more. And each of these are funded in part by Harvard, so they give you a little money to invite people to come to speak. And lots of them are political, more than social, and they have funny titles, the gay lesbians, or there's one I knew that Jews for conservative politics. This is not a very popular association. There's not too many Jews are in favor of conservative politics. But here was a girl, came here as a freshman, and that's what she was. And so I'm going to form an association. So if you go to I don't know how it is in China, but I've only been to one university there, Fudan, but Shanghai. But in Europe, you go and you look and you see the posters that are put up. There are no student associations. There are just lectures that are put on by the university, or the faculty invites you to something like this. But here, there are all these students who want you to get behind them and act together for some neglected principle. And Tocqueville speaks about the right to associate, which he says is only second say, to the right to be an individual. First you get yourself to be an individual, and then you immediately give it up and associate with somebody else. So acting on your own, that's the most natural thing, but the right of association is the second most natural thing, and it comes to America from an English origin. So here's again something that's kind of aristocratic, but it's not. It has this good effect that you can associate for the purpose of a new law. So, say the gays have this association for same-sex marriage, and that's a new law, and they've been so successful that maybe the law is about to change. I don't know, but it takes away from the power of a majority that the majority may just be temporary and not permanent. So you are a small person, and the majority is a large figure, much stronger than you are, but still, if you associate, maybe you can change what the majority wants or what it believes. And the purpose then with an association is to do something that isn't being done. So it's to do something new. So it's an opportunity for new people. It tells you that the majority is just a majority now. It can change tomorrow. So associations don't represent the majority because otherwise they wouldn't exist. So this is something natural, the right to associate, because people like to be together and to act together. Maybe we are individuals, but we don't like it living just by ourselves. It's lonely. So you like to be with other people, to associate. But to do this in a democracy is a free act and artificial. See, in an aristocracy, a noble already has people that he's associated with, his own peasants, his own serfs. So he can act on their behalf as an association, but in a democracy, the association has to be made artificially. And this so it requires a positive act of freedom, positive liberty, if you like. Sometimes people make a distinction between negative liberty and positive liberty. Negative liberty, liberty to say no. But it seems that no is never enough, because you're always saying no. When you say no, you have something better in mind. So you have a yes in back of your no. So a positive liberty in back of a negative liberty. And that's association, that requires association.
Tocqueville said that majority should be dangerous. What do you think of it? Is this still a problem today?
What could be dangerous?
Yes, the majority.
The majority, yes.
It can be
Yes. Right. Okay. Well, good. We're just, that's the next topic. So let's talk about that. The tyranny of the majority.